Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement. It's the podcast with you in mind. This is a special episode of our podcast. It's a special episode where I wanted to talk about the three spheres of the pickleball mind. This is an at the board special episode. At the board means that I am literally standing in front of the board where I do the teaching from my classroom, right? My studio classroom, if you will. And so if you want the benefits of the visual, check it out on YouTube as well. You'll get full benefit of listening to it on the podcast, so you don't have to run away right now and watch it on YouTube. But later on, if you want to check it out on YouTube, you just look at Pickleball Therapy on YouTube and you get to see it on the board displayed behind me. If you do go to the Pickleball Therapy on YouTube, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us reach more players just like you who would benefit from this sort of mental training. So let's talk about the three spheres of pickleball, how this all came to fruition. So, as you know, we've been doing the Pickleball Therapy podcast for a number of years now. If you've been following it for any period of time, it's been 3+ years of recording this podcast. It's been a fantastic journey for me personally as a human being and as a pickleball player. It's helped me tremendously to be able to bring these podcasts to you, in terms of my thinking and understanding, better understanding the mental side of pickleball and, frankly, the importance of it. And, I came from 40-some years of tennis, never really dealt with this stuff in tennis, just play tennis, just, didn't really think about the mental side of tennis. And I'm positive I left a lot, on the shelf, if you will, in terms of my tennis advancement, my tennis play, by not paying any mind, I guess pun intended, right? Without not paying any mind to the mental part of tennis. But in pickleball, I've been fortunate to have been exposed to it. Coach Peter Scales is a great mentor to me and to CJ Johnson, my partner, my business partner. And Coach Pete is, his teachings have changed, my life, really, my pickleball life and my life, because I understand things better now. But anyway, so the podcast has been a growth journey for me as a mental trainer and mental thinker about pickleball. And through that process, we wanted to then bring the teachings of the pickleball therapy philosophy, if you will, in written form. And so over the past year or so, we've been working on a book, and it started off as one book. And it's going to end up being, looks like 3 volumes of books covering each one of the spheres that I'm going to cover in this podcast, the 3 spheres of the pickleball mind. But when you put pen to paper, it just really crystallizes everything, right? And basically, you're starting to bring together different concepts from different teachers that I've had, right? Books I've read, folks I've dealt with, situations I've faced, podcasts, concepts, things like that. So you start crystallizing that. And it got me to thinking about the best way to organize the different parts, and this for reason terms spheres, right? But the different areas or different parts of the mental aspect of our sport of pickleball. Because here's the thing, it's not one. And that's really important, right? Because what happens is, we end up like mashing all of it together. And so, we'll read a book like The Inner Game of Tennis, or like Coach Pete's book, or like The Art of Learning, for instance, books like that. And so what happens is we think, okay, we've covered mental training, but the reality is we haven't, because there's a lot to it. And there's different parts that are different spheres that each cover a different part of our mental relationship with the sport. And focusing on one's great, but if you want to be as complete as you can, and if you want to improve as a player, right, because that's one of the spheres, you want to focus on, understand that there's more than one, and pay attention to the different areas, particularly focusing on the ones that most are going to give you benefit. And I'm going to give you some more thoughts on that during today's podcast. Now, let's talk about the 3 spheres and what they are. So the 3 spheres of mental training are perspective, play, and progress. So perspective is your big picture, right? That is that's relational, right? That's your relationship with pickleball. And that's an area that I think players don't spend enough time on. When I talk about play, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, that's what I understand to be mental training. And that's fine, because that's normally what most players would say they think mental training involves. Perspective is really big picture stuff. And we use the term relationship with pickleball. I know it's an unusual term to hear, because, we think about playing pickleball, and that's fine. That's part of it. But we really do have a relationship with the sport. And so if we understand that, and we understand that we can strengthen that, and we can strengthen our perspective, or the way that we come at the game, the way that we interact with this game, and that we're going to feel better. And I always like to say this, because we want to be pragmatic too. I know players want to play better, right? Not just feel better, you're going to play better. That's perspective. And I learned a ton of perspective from Coach Peter Scales. And like the book, I'm going to give you an example of a book that covers each one of these areas, so that you have an idea of how they're different. For instance, for perspective, I would turn to Coach Pete's book, which is Mental and Emotional Training for Tennis. You can drop the for tennis. But his key tenet is compete, -learn, -honor. So it's compete, learn, honor. That's his philosophy. That's how he comes at the mental part. And I will tell you that is primarily a perspective. Now, some of that applies to play and progress, right? But really, it's a perspective builder, right? So that's perspective. And I will tell you this, from the three, perspective, play, and progress, I will tell you that for my money, the best bang for your buck is perspective, meaning like that's going to really radically change how you interact with the sport. Play will help you play a little better. You'll have a little better focus, maybe drop some anxiety while you're playing. But if you help perspective, anxiety goes away anyway. So it pervades everything else. The second sphere is play. Play is what you think of when you think of mental training. Again, no criticism, right? It's normal. That's what we think of, right? Mental stuff is like mental toughness, mind of a champion, 110%, that kind of thing. All that is play. So that is our mental framing, or a mental mindset while we're in the act of playing. So it's while we're on the court, right? Around the time we're playing and during our game. That's play. That's the mental. That's that mental sphere. The book that I like there is The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Gallwey. Is a really good book for play. He talks a lot about self one, self two, and things like that. He also has improvement, has some perspective, but I like his for play. Helps you focus on the court and some techniques like that. So play is a really important sphere as well. And then the third sphere, may not apply to you. It probably does. I would say if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not a casual player. But no matter what your relationship with pickleball, no matter what your engagement is, right, what you want to do, perspective and play are always going to be in play, pun intended, right? They're always going to be active, right? The third sphere, progress, that's an entirely different type of mental training, because that one deals with your pickleball journey, right? That's your journey as a pickleball player in terms of your improvement. So it's the journey to go from where we are to where we want to go. And an example of a really good book there is Josh Waitzkin's book, The Art of Learning. Josh Waitzkin is a prodigy chess player. He's the actual player in Search of Bobby Fischer. He's the actual boy depicted in that movie, if you saw the movie. That's a really good book on the journey of growth, right? And so that requires its own kind of mental thinking, right? Its own mental approach. So these three spheres together, right? If you're a pickleball player who wants to maximize your relationship with pickleball, play your best, and progress or improve as a player, you want to have all three spheres. So on the board here, if you're watching it, you'll see it on the video, but on the board, if you're listening to it, I have all three spheres overlapping, and you have that sort of Venn diagram, I think it's called, where you have the overlap. And so that's where you have all three spheres. So as you progress in your mental part of your game, just remember that there are three spheres. And we are trying to, in our podcast, we are being more intentional ourselves, right? Intentionality is something we talk about a lot. We do it in our work as well. Inside the podcast, we're trying to be more intentional about making sure that we cover all three spheres with you as we come out with podcasts. So we'll have a podcast that'll cover maybe like perspective, right? That's Bowl of Ice Cream would be a good podcast on perspective, right? What's your perspective when you play? On play, there was a podcast that we have on hyper focus, right? On focusing on the ball while you're playing. That's really going to help you maximize your mind while you're in the middle of a game. And then for progress, I know we have several. One that comes to mind would be the lifelong learning. Maybe is a good one there. That there's no the mountaintop thing where basically like there's always a mountain to climb. That's a progress, because that's not perspective itself, right? You can play pickleball without climbing mountains. You can just play the way you play. That's fine. And it's not really about playing the game. It's about understanding the journey of an improving pickleball player and how you have to climb mountains and there's valleys and you plateau. So that's an example of 3 podcasts that cover the 3 spheres. So as you think about yourself and your growth as a pickleball player, I highly recommend the books that I mentioned. If you can go to betterpickleball.com, there's a resources tab. There's a link in there to an Amazon page. It's an affiliate page, but the same price anyway, but it's an Amazon page. You can order any of those books on there. Obviously, once our book comes out, we hope that you'll check out the book and give it a read. I think you'll find it really helpful, especially on perspective, because that's the first volume of the book that's going to come out is on perspective. So all 3. And focus on the one that most calls out to you. And if you're not sure what to do, start with perspective with Coach Pete's book. That's going to be a really good place to start. If you feel good about your perspective, you want a little bit of more help in terms of your on court, I think Inner Game of Tennis is a great place to start. And if you just want to understand the growth journey, have a big picture view of growth and all that, Josh Waitzkin's book, The Art of Learning, is a really good resource for that. So anyway, those are the 3 spheres. I hope you enjoyed the presentation of the 3 spheres. It helps you further develop or deepen your understanding of your mental process and your growth as a more complete, pickleball player. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider rating and reviewing it. It really helps us reach other players. And as always, please share the podcast with your friends. If you enjoyed the podcast, they probably will too. And if you're interested in the book, shoot us an email. therapy@betterpickleball.com, and we'll start putting together a list of email addresses of folks who are interested in the book, and we'll make sure that you know when it is available for pre-order so you can be one of the first to receive a copy of the book. I hope you have a great week this week, and I'll see you this Friday for a regular episode of Pickleball Therapy.